Discovery. During renovation, the beginning of the nightmare. Maple Hollow was one of those quiet little towns tucked away in the Montana countryside, population so small that nearly everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. Nestled at the edge of Oak Lane, house number 18 had been an eyesore for years. Weather-worn siding, a sagging roof, and a wild lawn gave it an almost gothic charm, yet no one dared set foot inside. To Carl Johnson, a small-time contractor looking to make a name for himself, it was the perfect project. Carl had been hired to renovate the property by the new owner, Lisa Pryor, a businesswoman from Denver who saw potential and profit in flipping the house. "It's old, but it's got bones," Lisa had joked when handing Carl the keys. Little did she know how chillingly accurate that statement would become. Carl gathered his small, trusted team, 2 local workers, Rick and Manny, and they got to work. It started like any other renovation, clearing debris, gutting the interior, breaking down the ugly basement walls to make way for a new foundation. But on the 3rd day, mundane turned macabre. "Hey Carl, you want to take a look at this?" Rick's voice echoed from the unfinished basement. He sounded puzzled, not alarmed, yet. Carl wiped the sweat from his brow and descended the creaky wooden stairs. The air was cooler below ground, damp and earthy. Rick stood holding a pickaxe in one hand, pointing at the floor with the other. The year-round humidity had warped the concrete foundation, and Carl had instructed them to dig below it to lay fresh footing. What Rick had unearthed wasn't just another pile of broken bricks or useless junk left behind, it was a fragment of something pale and smooth, jutting out of the damp dirt. "What the hell is that? Some weird old pipe?" Carl squatted down for a closer look. "It's not metal," Rick said. "I know that much." Manny joined them, leaning on his shovel. "It's too thick for PVC," he muttered. His brows furrowed, and he squatted as well. Carl reached out and gingerly brushed away the surrounding soil. His heart froze. "Oh shit!" A long, slender shard, ankle-thick at one end, tapering to a hollow curve, slowly revealed itself under his touch. "That's a bone." Manny and Rick exchanged nervous glances, their gruff contractor exteriors beginning to crack. "You think it's from a dog? Like someone buried their pet here or something?" Rick asked, trying to mask unease with nonchalance. Carl shook his head slowly, his stomach nodding. "Nope, that's not an animal bone." He'd seen enough Discovery Channel specials to recognize the human-like shape of what could only be a femur. As the gravity of the situation sank in, the room seemed to shrink. Carl had no idea what to say, but Manny broke the silence with a tentative suggestion. "So, we should stop digging, right?" Carl nodded, struggling to suppress the panic building in his chest. Yet something tugged at him, a morbid sense of responsibility maybe, or sheer disbelief. Against his better judgment, he stood up and motioned toward the shovels. "Hold on, let's see if there's more." It felt like madness, digging into what they now suspected to be a clandestine grave. As shovelfuls of dirt were swept aside, eerie signs of foul play began to emerge. The dirt was loose, too loose for something untouched for decades. And then came the shocker. Additional bones, one after another, lying buried in strange, unnatural angles. A fractured rib here, a twisted tarsal there. "Jesus Christ," Manny whispered, disgusted. He tossed his shovel aside and backed away. Even Rick, whose bravado hadn't faltered earlier, stopped digging altogether. Carl stood frozen, staring into the pit. It wasn't just one skeleton, it was 2, maybe 3, maybe more. And that realization sent his rational mind running for the exit. He grabbed his phone and dialed Lisa Pryor. The line rang 3 times before she answered. "Lisa, we found something," Carl managed, his voice tight and uneven. "Bones." "What do you mean, bones?" Lisa replied. "Human bones, at least 3 sets, maybe more, buried right under the foundation." A beat of silence hung heavy over the call. Lisa's voice dropped low, almost a whisper. What? "You need to call the cops, Lisa, like, now." Within half an hour, the Maple Hollow Sheriff's Department arrived. Deputy Frank Webb, a middle-aged man with a reputation for skepticism, knelt by the pit after listening to Carl's recount. "Well, hell," he muttered. "Looks like you just unearthed the town's biggest secret." His words carried a mixture of gravity and intrigue, like he'd half expected to stumble upon something like this in their sleepy little suburb. But this wasn't just any secret. This was murder, multiple murders, and it was only the beginning. "You boys step back," Webb ordered. "This place is a crime scene now." As police tape cordoned off the once ordinary basement, crowds from the surrounding neighborhood began to gather on the street. Whispers filled the air like dry leaves in the wind. "What's going on?" "Heard they found bodies in there." "Jesus!" In that house? Outside the house, Carl and his crew stood grim-faced, soaking in the surreal spectacle. This wasn't the project he'd signed up for. He'd wanted to fix walls and floors, not uncover a nightmare buried just inches beneath the surface. And yet, as Carl gazed at the skeletal remains being unearthed one by one, he couldn't shake a haunting realization. This forgotten house, this hidden ground, had been a silent witness to unspeakable darkness for years. A chill ran down his spine as the sheriff's radio crackled with more orders. "Get the forensics team in here, we're gonna be here all night." The presence of 6 skeletons beneath the basement. As the small crowd of neighbors grew outside the house, the sheriff's department got to work. The initial discovery had already sent ripples of unease through the area, but nobody was prepared for what lay ahead. What had started as a bizarre and troubling find was about to escalate into a full-blown nightmare. Deputy Frank Webb stood at the edge of the pit in the basement, his hands resting on his hips as he hunched slightly forward. His weathered face, an unshaken mask during most of the routine calls in Maple Hollow, now bore lines of tension that even he couldn't hide. He squinted hard at the increasing number of bones being pulled from the ground. "Damn," he muttered, breaking the silence. "That's not just one person." The forensics team had arrived barely an hour after Webb's call went through. Their movements were swift and methodical, the clinking of their tools oddly loud in the heavy stillness of the basement. A makeshift floodlight lit up the pit, casting sharp shadows on the walls. Carl Johnson, Rick and Manny stood off to the side, pale and visibly shaken but unable or unwilling to leave just yet. "I thought the sheriff's department just dealt with the occasional break-in or some kids running wild," Rick said, his voice barely above a whisper as he leaned toward Carl. "What the hell is this?" Carl, staring numbly at the disturbed earth, could only shake his head. He hadn't dared utter another word since the police arrived, afraid that his voice might crack under the weight of what he was witnessing. From across the room, Deputy Webb glanced over at them and waved Carl closer. "Carl!" he called, his voice steady but carrying the authority of someone who didn't like to repeat himself. "Yes, sir?" Carl approached cautiously, his boots crunching on loose dirt. Webb gestured toward the widening pit that now revealed fragments of 6 human skeletons, one more twisted and broken than the next. "You said this was a foundation repair job, right? That you dug through because the footing was too weak?" Carl nodded slowly as his eyes darted between Webb and the bones. "Yeah, the concrete was all warped from the moisture in the ground. He hesitated, swallowing down the bile threatening to rise. "I didn't know this was under there." Webb grunted, rubbing his chin as he stared at the remains. "You shouldn't, nobody should, unless they put them there themselves." "Jesus," Carl whispered. "How long do you think these people have been here?" Before Webb could answer, a forensic technician, a wiry man in his late 30s with curly hair sticking out awkwardly from beneath his blue gloves, stood and cleared his throat. "Sheriff," he began, holding up a femur bone. "Preliminarily, I'd say we're looking at victims from different time periods. See this discoloration here?" He pointed at the bone, its ends darker and more brittle than the rest. "That suggests longer exposure to the elements before burial, but some of these others," he continued, gesturing to another stack of remains, "look newer, maybe within the last decade." Carl felt the room spinning. "Last decade?" His voice cracked. "Christ, these aren't centuries-old remains?" "Nope," the technician replied bluntly as he began packing the femur into an evidence bag. "This—" He straightened up, his face grim. "This probably isn't just some historical burial site or whatever you were hoping it was." "Not by a long shot," Webb added gruffly. "And with angles like that," he gestured toward the unnatural bend of a fractured rib bone. "We're not looking at natural causes, someone broke those bones." Manny, who had remained uncharacteristically silent at the back of the room, suddenly stepped forward. "Wait a second," he said, his voice tight with incredulity. "You're saying all of these folks, whoever they were killed, like murdered?" The technician didn't answer directly, but his silence spoke volumes. Instead, he knelt back to continue cataloging skeletal fragments, while another member of his team carefully uncovered what appeared to be a human jawbone. Rick exhaled sharply, his bravado gone for good. "Man, this is unreal. We just came here to work, Carl," he said, his tone shaking. "We're not supposed to be standing over graves." Webb turned toward the group with a hard expression and gestured for them to back up further. "You're not in trouble," he told them, "but you're gonna want to stay the hell out of this area from now on. This is a crime scene now, boys." They nodded, retreating toward the stairs without protest. Just then Lisa Pryor arrived, pushing her way past the yellow tape at the basement door. Dressed in jeans and a blazer that suggested she'd just driven fast from Denver, she was visibly panicked. "Deputy Webb," she called out, descending the stairs as fast as she dared. "I got here as soon as I could. What in God's name is going on?" Webb raised a hand to calm her down, his tone firm. "Miss Pryor, I'd appreciate if you stayed up top." "No way!" Lisa snapped. "This is my property. I need to know what's happening." She turned toward Carl, who looked like he wanted to shrink into the walls and disappear. "Carl, talk to me." "It's bad," Carl muttered, running a hand over his face. "Lisa, we found bodies, 6 of them." Her breath hitched. 6! She stumbled backward slightly before regaining her balance. "Oh my God, this can't be real." "It's very real," Webb said sharply, drawing her attention back to him. "And you'll need to cooperate fully from here on out. When's the last time this house was lived in before you bought it?" I don't know." Lisa's voice was faint now, shock settling in. "It was abandoned for what? At least 15 years, maybe more?" "Well, someone wasn't keeping it empty," Webb replied dryly, motioning toward the pit. 6 skeletons don't just wander under a foundation on their own." Lisa shook her head, stunned. "I don't understand. Who would have done this? And why?" "That's what we're here to find out," Webb said. He glanced at the forensics team again. "But I'll tell you this much, this house didn't just see tragedy, it saw evil." As the night deepened and the forensics crew continued their grim work, a deep unease fell over the basement. Each new bone they uncovered seemed to pull the air tighter and heavier around them. Carl, Lisa, and the others stood silently at a distance, now grappling with the same horrifying question. Who were these people and who had buried them here? The sinister history of the house. By the following morning, the inexplicable weight of the discovery at the old house had seeped into the air around Maple Hollow, casting a shadow over the seemingly tranquil town. Rumors had started to churn like turbulent water beneath the surface, and deputies from the sheriff's office were combing through stacks of land records and property transfers tied to house number 18 on Oak Lane. Sheriff Frank Webb sat in his office sipping his 3rd mug of lukewarm coffee, staring wearily at the paperwork spread out before him. A handwritten list of names formed a trail, tracing the history of the house back nearly 50 years. Nothing about it made sense. "Any luck?" Deputy Anna Carter stepped into the room, her arms full of dusty legal files pulled from town archives. She was young but sharp, with a knack for noticing small inconsistencies. Webb ran a hand over his stubbled chin and sighed. "Depends on what you mean by luck." He shot her a tired half-smile. "Everything about this goddamn house is messy. Owners coming and going, some barely sticking around for a year. It's practically a revolving door." Anna set the files on the desk with a soft thud and pulled up a chair. "Okay, so, walk me through it. What do we know so far?" Webb leaned forward, his knuckles gripping the edge of the desk. The house was built in 1968 by Richard and Ella Brooks. They were pretty reputable back then, a normal couple, no red flags. They stayed about 6 years, then packed up one summer and moved to Oregon. No big scandal there. "So, why'd they leave?" Anna asked, tapping her pen against the table. "Here's where things start to feel off. They sold the house dirt cheap to a guy named Timothy Harper in 1974. Harper was a loner, lived there barely 3 years. People said he started getting paranoid, kept his curtains drawn, lights off at night. Then one day, without warning, he takes off. Sells it to some out-of-state trader for a fraction of what he paid," Webb explained. Anna raised an eyebrow. "Paranoid how? Did anyone report anything weird?" Webb shrugged. "Small-town folks back then didn't ask a lot of questions, but apparently there were noises people claimed to hear late at night. Clanking, digging, things like that. Harper swore raccoons were getting into his basement, but nobody's ever seen any signs of pest control out there." "Okay, so Harper bolts and then?" "Then it gets even weirder," Webb muttered, pushing a grainy black-and-white photo across the desk. The photo showed a smiling middle-aged man next to a crumbling picket fence, a rusted swing set barely visible in the background. "This is Charles Murray. Bought the house in 1982. Within 6 months his wife files a police report saying he's gone missing. His car was still out front, but the guy just vanished." "Wait, missing from the house?" Anna's tone sharpened. Webb nodded grimly. "Yep, she claimed he went into the basement one evening and never came back up." Anna blinked, and her pen stopped mid-tap. "You're kidding." "I wish I were. Local deputies at the time chalked it up to her being hysterical. Figured he must have left her and made her story up for sympathy, but look at this." Webb handed her another file, yellowed with age. It was a scanned police report from October 1982. In it, Charles's wife had described hearing heavy thuds and muffled noises beneath the floorboards a few nights before his disappearance. "And the cops didn't think that was worth investigating?" Anna asked incredulously. "Apparently not," Webb said dryly. Anyway, Murray's wife eventually sold the place a year later to an older couple, the Langstons. They stayed longer than most, 6, maybe 7 years. But here's the kicker. Mr. Langston filed a noise complaint in 1989, said he kept hearing scraping sounds in the walls. Anna narrowed her eyes. "Scraping sounds?" Webb nodded. The report said he thought it might be tree roots rubbing against the outside of the house. But when they checked, there weren't any trees close enough. Anna leaned back in her chair, the picture forming in her mind more unsettling by the second. "So let me get this straight. 2 missing persons tied to the property, strange noises everywhere, and still no major red flags raised?" Webb smirked bitterly. "Welcome to small-town bureaucracy, Carter." The conversation was interrupted by Deputy Harris poking his head into the office. "Sheriff, you're gonna want to hear this. I just talked to Margie Sims. Been living up the street from number 18 since the 90s. She says back in 94, the owner at the time, Harris Cole, was acting all kinds of strange." "Harris Cole?" Anna asked, flipping through her notes. "Didn't he own the place right before it got abandoned?" "Yep," Webb confirmed. "Took over after the Langstons, stayed until about 1996. What did Sims say?" Harris stepped fully into the room, lowering his voice unconsciously. "She told me Cole hardly ever came out during the day. Did all his yard work at night, digging, burying stuff in the backyard. Said he installed locks on the outside of the basement door, which she thought was super suspicious. Then one day, poof, he's gone. Just vanished. Kind of like Charles Murray." Anna's pen hit the desk. "Jesus Christ, who the hell are we dealing with here?" "I don't know yet," Webb admitted, rubbing at his temple. "But I think it's time we start treating this house as more than just unlucky. If people were burying stuff or someone in that basement for decades, we need to figure out exactly when it started and why." "Do you believe in patterns, Sheriff?" Anna asked suddenly. "What? Patterns?" she repeated. "People keep leaving this house. Nobody stays around long enough to ask the hard questions. What if it's not just bad luck? What if someone uses this house? What if it's, I don't know, planned?" Webb considered this for a moment. It wasn't a thought he liked, but it was impossible to ignore it any longer. He glanced at the photo of Harris Cole, then at the police reports spread out before him. "If this place is as bad as it seems," he said finally, "then we've only started scratching the surface." Forensics team discovers 4 more skeletons in the backyard. By late afternoon, the commotion surrounding house number 18 had only grown louder. The street outside was now lined with curious neighbors whispering to one another, their faces a blend of fascination and unease. Beyond the yellow police tape, the forensics team remained hard at work, meticulously searching every inch of the property under the sharp glare of floodlights. Carl Johnson and his crew had long since been ushered away from the basement, unsure how they felt about being replaced by squads of investigators. Outside, the lead forensic anthropologist, Dr. Emily Kane, stood with Deputy Frank Webb, surveying the overgrown backyard, an area that seemed to thrum with an eerie silence. "You ever seen anything like this before?" Deputy Webb asked, gripping the edge of a notepad as though it might anchor him in the midst of this escalating chaos. Emily, a seasoned investigator with years of field experience, shook her head, her face a stone mask of focus. "Frank, I've dug up Civil War graves and forgotten cemeteries. I've unearthed skeletons from every era. But finding this many bodies in one place, this haphazardly buried, it's different. It feels chaotic, almost personal." Webb's eyes narrowed as he scanned the yard. "And you really think there could be more out here?" His voice was laced with disbelief, though they both knew the answer already. The basement findings had only been the tip of the iceberg. "I don't think," Emily said, slipping on a pair of latex gloves. "I know. If someone went to the trouble of hiding 6 bodies under the house, you can bet they didn't stop there. Most predators stick to familiar territory. My guess? This backyard holds secrets." As if on cue, the forensic technician assigned to the backyard stepped forward from the edge of the lawn, his boots squelching in the damp soil. He waved them over. "You're gonna want to see this," the tech called out. His words carried a grim finality that made Webb's stomach tighten. Emily and Webb walked over, accompanied by 2 other officers. The far corner of the yard, partially obscured by wild blackberry bushes and the skeletal remnants of an old fruit tree, showed clear signs of disturbed earth. The technician had been using a thin metal probe to test the density of the soil and now stood over a spot where the probe sunk nearly a foot deeper than the surrounding area. "I think somebody's been digging here," the technician said, pointing down. "Whatever's under there, it's not natural. The soil's too loose, looks like it was recently moved, and there's barely any root infiltration." Emily nodded, her professional mask holding steady. "Fine. Bring in the ground-penetrating radar." Within minutes, the team rolled out a compact radar device across the suspected area. The monitor pinged irregularities in the soil below, hints of objects that didn't belong. Emily's trained eyes traced the jagged lines forming on the monitor, clearly indicating shallow anomalies beneath the surface. "Looks like we've got at least 2 disturbances here, maybe 3. She said it matter-of-factly, but even her calm demeanor couldn't erase the gravity of the situation. "What are we talking?" Webb asked, leaning closer. "More bones?" Emily straightened. "I'd bet on it, and probably the same as the basement. Haphazard burials, unmarked graves, but we won't know for sure until we dig." The first shovel hit the ground with a hollow thud, and soon the forensics team began gently peeling back layers of damp, compacted soil. The backyard excavation was painstaking, each movement cautious so as not to disturb or destroy evidence. If the basement had felt grim and claustrophobic, the yard beneath the late afternoon sky carried a haunting surrealism, as if the ground itself had been waiting to reveal its horrors. After an hour of work, one of the technicians froze. "Dr. Kane," he called softly, waving her over, "you'll want to see this." Emily crouched beside him, her gloved hands carefully brushing away remaining soil. The faint but unmistakable curve of a human ribcage began to emerge, half buried and twisted unnaturally within the dirt. "It's a skeleton," she confirmed, her voice steady but low. She brushed further around the remains, finding the bones to be partially crushed, almost as if someone had hurriedly tamped down the earth above them. "Jesus," Webb muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Wait," Emily said, holding up a finger as one of her assistants handed her another tool. She leaned closer, revealing another smaller bone structure intermingled with the first skeleton, the telltale outline of a child's ribcage. "Son of a," Webb hissed, catching himself just as his voice began to rise, aware that curious ears lingered just beyond the police tape. Dr. Kane stayed professional, though a shadow seemed to darken her features. "This isn't just one burial site," she said, standing to glance around the yard. Her eyes locked onto another disturbed patch of soil. "It's 2, no, 3. Someone didn't care about hiding these properly. This was panic. Look at how shallow the graves are. Whoever did this wanted it done quickly." An officer standing nearby spoke up, his voice tinged with unease. "Dr. Kane, if this was panic, doesn't that mean they could come back? Like maybe some of this was done more recently?" "The bodies in the basement span decades," she replied. "There's no reason to think the backyard doesn't tell the same story. But yeah, it's possible. We need to test every square inch of this property." By the time dusk settled in, the forensics team had unearthed 4 more skeletons, all in varying states of decomposition. Some bones showed the brittle discoloration of age, while others appeared relatively fresh, shockingly white against the dark soil. What became unsettlingly clear was that the backyard was not an organized burial ground, it was a dumping ground. Carl reappeared near the edge of the police tape, his face gaunt and pale. Lisa was beside him, both unable to shake the pull of watching their nightmare escalate. They weren't supposed to be here anymore, but Carl couldn't stay away. "4 more, Carl," Lisa whispered, her hands trembling as she gripped her jacket tighter around her shoulders. "That's 10 people. 10 people, buried just steps away from where we were working." Carl didn't answer. His hands shook as he lit a cigarette, though his eyes remained fixed on the distant figures crouched in the dirt. "How the hell does something like this happen?" he muttered. "In a town like this?" "It shouldn't," Lisa replied softly, her voice caught in her throat. "But somehow, it did." Deputy Webb, now standing nearby with arms crossed against the cold, looked over at Carl and Lisa, his own face unreadable apart from the tension in his jaw. "If you two thought the basement was bad," he began gruffly, then paused, shaking his head. "Get ready, this isn't close to over." As the last remnants of daylight disappeared, the skeletons were carefully bagged and tagged for further examination. The backyard excavation had confirmed everyone's worst fears. Whoever had been responsible for these horrors had been using the house and its land as their playground of murder for years, or perhaps even decades. Emily removed her gloves and glanced toward the house darkly. "This isn't a case of just covering something up," she muttered to herself. "This was methodical. This was control. And whoever did this, they did it over and over again." The mysterious rumors about the caretaker. Word about the grisly discoveries at house number 18 spread quickly through Maple Hollow. By the second day of the investigation, the entire town was buzzing, and somewhere amidst the whispers, a name began to surface: Harris Cole. At the corner diner on Main Street, where the scent of greasy burgers and burnt coffee usually dominated the air, voices were hush-hush, but intense. Margie Sims, one of the neighborhood's oldest residents, leaned over her cup of tea, her tired eyes fixed on the sheriff and Deputy Anna Carter sitting across from her at a booth. "Sheriff Webb, I ain't one for gossip, you know that," Margie began, her voice soft but steady. "Good," Webb replied curtly, flipping open his notepad, "because gossip doesn't help anything. I need facts, Margie. You lived near that house for years. Tell me what you know about Harris Cole." Margie stared into her teacup as if the swirling liquid held the answers to decades of secrets. "That man creeped me out," she said finally. "He wasn't all there in the head, if you know what I mean. I don't know his whole story, just that he moved into that house sometime in the early 90s. The owners before him, the Landons or Langstons or whoever, had up and left one day like they were running from something." Webb leaned forward. "Margie, focus on Harris." Margie took a deep breath. "When Harris turned up, we figured he was just some drifter, a loner who needed work. He wasn't exactly friendly, kept to himself mostly, but he always seemed off. Did all his yard work at night like he was hiding from the sun. You'd see his shadow out there, digging or moving something even after midnight. Of course, back then you don't question folks' business." "Digging?" Anna's eyebrows shot up. "What kind of digging?" "That's the thing. You'd ask, and Harris'd flash you this weird smile and say, 'Just moving dirt.' One time I asked him what he was planting since he was always in the backyard, and you know what he said?" Margie's voice dropped to a whisper. "Souls grow better in the dark." Anna exchanged a sharp glance with Webb, both trying to mask their unease. Webb cleared his throat, his tone skeptical. "You're saying he was burying stuff in the backyard, and nobody thought to report that?" "Report what, Sheriff?" Margie retorted, her tone defensive now. "That he was an oddball who liked night gardening? Small towns don't work like that. You see something strange, you mind your business." "Sides, nobody could prove anything. He had that basement padlocked from the outside with the heaviest locks I'd ever seen. Said he didn't trust the critters getting in there. Nobody ever went in, not even delivery folks." Anna scribbled furiously in her notebook, piecing the narrative together. "All right, so how did Harris leave? Did he just disappear too, like some of the owners before him?" Margie shook her head. "Not right away. He stuck around for a few years, but then things started to really get weird." She paused, fidgeting with her napkin. "There were rumors. People said they heard screaming coming from that house, short little bursts in the middle of the night. By the time anyone thought to check, it was dead quiet again. Harris would stand on the porch and just stare at whoever dared look his way, like daring them to say something." Webb leaned back slightly, contemplating her words. "And the cops? Not a single call?" "None that went anywhere. Anytime someone mentioned it, Harris always had some excuse. Kids messing around, or foxes wailing in the woods. And he was convincing enough to make people brush it off, but I'll tell you this," Margie leaned in further, her voice trembling now. "When I saw him packing up, I knew something wasn't right. He drove this old beat-up Chevy pickup. One of the last times I saw him, that truck was loaded with tarp-covered bundles. Couldn't see what they were, but they sure didn't look like furniture." Webb's jaw clenched. "Did anyone ever follow up on that?" Margie met his gaze, her expression incredulous. "Follow up, Sheriff. When he left, we celebrated. Nobody wanted to poke at whatever demons that man brought into town. We just wanted him gone. It wasn't long after that the house started falling apart. Wood rotting, windows busted. Folks said it was cursed, so nobody dared move in. That's why it sat empty for so long." Anna tilted her head, fixing Margie with a curious stare. "Margie, if you didn't know for sure what Harris was doing, why are you so sure something was wrong?" Margie looked down at her hands, wringing the napkin nervously. "Because of the dogs," she said after a long pause. "The dogs?" Webb asked. "Harris didn't have pets. He didn't even like people, let alone animals. But every so often I'd see stray dogs sniffing around his backyard, always the same spots, digging, whimpering, like they smelled something they wanted to get to. Couple days later, those same strays be gone. Just gone." The booth fell silent, the only sound the faint clink of plates being stacked behind the counter. Webb jotted something down on his pad before snapping it shut. "All right, Margie, that's helpful. Anything else you remember about Harris?" Margie hesitated, then nodded. "There was one more thing. When I was a kid, my grandma used to tell me this old Appalachian saying, 'When men borrow the earth for secrets, it always gives 'em back.'" One time I said something like that to Harris when he was out digging. You know what he said? Her eyes went wide as if the memory itself had startled her. Some secrets are better when they stay fed. Then he just walked off, like it was nothing. Webb exhaled slowly. Fed, he muttered under his breath. Christ. Anna shut her notebook, her face still processing the bizarre details. We need to see what's left of that truck. If it's still out there, who knows what we'll find. Webb nodded, already working through the logistics. We'll start digging into Harris Cole's records. Bank accounts, work history, anything we can pull. If there's a pattern here, we'll find it. Margie looked between the two of them nervously. Sheriff, you think he's coming back? No, Webb said firmly, standing to leave. Then after a pause, but if we're lucky, he left behind every reason we'll never have to worry about him again. As the deputies exited the diner into the crisp evening air, the weight of Margie's words followed them. Harris Cole wasn't just an eccentric caretaker. He was a man who had turned that house and perhaps the entire plot of land into something far darker. Now it was up to them to unearth the truth and stop the shadows of number 18 from spreading any further. Searching for clues in old missing persons cases. The Maple Hollow Sheriff's Department buzzed with activity as the investigation into house number 18 deepened. The sense of urgency was palpable. Inside their small conference room, the walls were now plastered with photos, timelines, and maps, an impromptu war room dedicated to unraveling decades of mysteries. Beneath the fluorescent lights, Sheriff Frank Webb stood with his arms crossed, staring at the growing list of missing persons taped to the whiteboard. Deputy Anna Carter flipped through a stack of file folders. All right, she began, her voice steady but tinged with disbelief. We've got 9. 9 people who vanished over the last 20 years without so much as a trace, all of them from here or neighboring towns. She let the folder fall open dramatically on the table. Tell me that's just a coincidence. It's not, Webb said firmly, his jaw tight. His eyes lingered on the photos pinned to the board, each one representing another missing life. We're past coincidences, Anna. This is something bigger, something evil. Deputy Harris, sitting on the far side of the table, leaned forward with a skeptical expression. But do we know for sure those disappearances are even connected to the house? Hell, some of these folks might have just skipped town or been run off the road somewhere. Anna shot him a sharp look, her tone cutting. Harris, 9 people didn't just skip town. We've got drifters, workers, even a teenager who went missing. And don't forget, she said, tapping one of the photos of a young woman. Natalie James, 23 years old, went missing 6 years ago while working a landscaping job less than 2 miles from Oak Lane. The same summer when neighbors said they stopped seeing Harris Cole. You honestly think that's a coincidence? Harris shrugged, but he didn't push back further. Truthfully, the mounting evidence was making it hard to argue otherwise. Webb rubbed his temples with one hand, the other motioning toward the timeline Anna had meticulously laid out on the board. Let's piece this together. Start at the beginning. Who's first on this list? Anna pointed to a faded black and white headshot of an older man with gray hair and a solemn expression. David Hartley, 1983, local handyman. Took jobs all across Maple Hollow. Last seen heading to a house renovation job out on Ridgewood Drive, which, she glanced at another map spread on the table, is less than 3 blocks from house number 18. What's the story? Webb asked, his voice steady but low. Anna flipped through her notes. Not much. He didn't have family in town, so nobody reported him missing right away. Days turned into weeks. His old employer said he called him lazy and assumed he skipped town. No body, no clues, and no follow-up. That tracks. Small-town cops from the 80s probably didn't bat an eye at a guy like him disappearing, Webb muttered grimly, folding his arms tighter. What's next? Anna slid the next photo into view. It was a blurry Polaroid of a man in his 30s wearing coveralls and holding a wrench. His name was scrawled across the bottom, Elliot Jansen. 1989, Anna began. Mechanic, lived in Clearwater, about 10 miles out of town. Friends say he came to Maple Hollow to help out his cousin who was remodeling their property. Was staying here, working odd jobs, just trying to make ends meet. Let me guess, Harris chimed in, perking up slightly. He never left? Anna nodded. That's right. His car was found parked on the south side of town, completely abandoned. The family said he wouldn't have just left his tools, but since there was no sign of foul play, the cops barely investigated. One lead came through. Someone said they saw Elliot near Oak Lane. She paused to let that sink in. That was the last time anyone saw him. Webb let out a slow exhale, his mind already working to piece the pattern together. So, we've got 2 men who were in Maple Hollow doing temporary work and disappeared while in proximity to Oak Lane. What else? Anna held up the next folder, her expression darkening. It was a high school photo of a bright-eyed teenage girl, her smile almost too painful to look at now. Sarah McConnell, 1994, just 17 years old. She lived down Pine Hill Road, maybe a 10-minute walk from the Oak Lane area. Last seen walking home one evening after a church youth group meeting. Webb's brow furrowed. You're telling me she was just a kid? Yes, sir. Anna's tone softened. She was. No history of running away, no boyfriends or drama. It was the kind of disappearance that put the whole town on high alert. For about a year anyway. But by 1995 people stopped talking about it. No evidence, no leads. Just... She gestured toward the name on the whiteboard. Gone. A heavy silence settled over the room. All right, Webb finally said, his voice low and deliberate. That's 3. What about the most recent ones? Anna slid over 2 newer files. The first showed a middle-aged man with glasses and a slight frame. Ray Bishop, 2015. He was a drifter, but he spent a lot of time helping out at the hardware store. Friendly guy. Everyone in town knew him well enough. Not well enough to know where he went, though. He was last seen buying a shovel at the hardware store. That the same shovel we found buried under the basement floor? Harris asked, raising an eyebrow. Anna gave a small nod. Sure looks like it. And the next one? Anna tapped the last photo, a picture of a young brunette with hopeful eyes. The caption read, Natalie James, 23. Natalie, Anna said softly. She was the one everyone assumed had skipped town. She worked as a landscaper, showed up here in 2016 after a breakup and needed work. She was sweet, bubbly. She never had any enemies according to her boss. Last seen working out on Oak Lane, a short 2-day gig trimming hedges and cleaning up a yard near House 18. Webb's jaw clenched visibly. And no one reported seeing or hearing anything unusual? Nope, nobody. For a few moments, the only sounds in the room were the low hum of the air conditioner and the rustle of files being shuffled. The list on the whiteboard stared back at them like an accusation, each name demanding justice that had never come. Harris broke the silence first, his voice barely a mutter. Jesus Christ. How many people went missing in this town before anyone even noticed? Too many, Webb answered grimly. His hand traced along the names on the whiteboard. And if house number 18's involved in all of this, then we need to be prepared to find a lot more than we bargained for. Anna folded her hands tightly in her lap. You think we'll ever know how far back this goes? Webb didn't look away from the timeline as he spoke. Maybe, but if this house is a hunting ground, then Harris Cole didn't just start something, he carried on something, and we damn well better find out who started it. Anna felt the weight of his words settle over her as her eyes scanned the board again. A list of the missing, stretching across decades, and somehow they all seemed to point toward a single dark intersection, house number 18 on Oak Lane. Verifying Harris Cole, the prime suspect. By the time Harris Cole's name had surfaced in multiple interviews with neighbors, the Maple Hollow Sheriff's Department was fully zeroed in on him as their prime suspect. It wasn't just the strange rumors surrounding his time at house number 18. It was the timeline, the uncanny connections to missing persons cases, and the eerie stories of his nighttime activities. But in a case filled with questions, Harris's own shadowy past was rapidly becoming the biggest piece of the puzzle. All right, Sheriff Frank Webb said, pacing in front of the whiteboard covered in photos, timelines, and notes. We all know Cole's our guy. Too much lines up for him not to be. The real question is, how do we prove it? Deputy Anna Carter stood at the edge of the room, flipping through a thick stack of documents spread out over the conference table. We've got threads, Sheriff. We just need to pull them until something snaps. She tapped a line on the timeline drawn in red marker. Every single time Harris Cole entered the picture, every time he lived in town for more than a few months, someone disappeared. That can't just be coincidence. Deputy Harris leaned back in his chair with his arms crossed, his skeptical tone returning. Sure, but the guy's been off our radar for what, almost 20 years? What are we gonna do? Dig up his entire life history? For all we know, he's dead or living in a van in some other state. Webb shot him a hard look. Then we find out. His voice carried the kind of weight that left no room for argument. Wherever he's been hiding, we need to know. I want to know every damn thing about him, where he's worked, where he's lived, who he's talked to, and I want it yesterday. Anna straightened up, a determined glint in her eye. I already started digging into his background, Sheriff. Let me run you through what we've got. All right, Webb said, motioning for her to continue. Lay it on me. Anna held up a grainy photo of a man in his late 30s. Harris Cole in the early 1990s. He had dark hollow eyes and a wiry unkempt beard, his expression somewhere between a smirk and a snarl. This photo was taken a few years after he first moved to Maple Hollow, Anna began. Before that he was bouncing between towns in Montana and the Dakotas, picking up odd jobs. But, here's what's interesting. Cole has 2 prior arrests, one in 1987 for assault and battery in Billings, Montana, and another in 1989 for trespassing in Rapid City, South Dakota. Both times he was released on minor charges, no jail time. What kind of assault? Webb asked, narrowing his eyes. Anna referred back to her notes. Bar fight, some guy pissed him off and he slammed a beer bottle over his head. Claims it was self-defense, but witnesses said Harris started it. He avoided jail by paying a fine, small-town justice. Harris leaned forward, frowning. And the trespassing? That's where it gets stranger, Anna replied. He was caught sneaking onto a livestock farm late at night. Sheriff's deputies found him out in the fields, digging near the back of the property. When they questioned him, he said he got lost while hiking. She looked up, her expression grim. The farm owner didn't buy it, said it looked like he was digging for something. Jesus, Webb muttered, running a hand through his hair. This guy's got a thing for dirt, huh? Let me guess, no follow-up? Anna nodded. Exactly, small fine again. No one suspected him of anything worse, and Cole disappeared out of town a week later. The room was quiet for a moment as everyone absorbed the implications. Webb broke the silence. All right, so he's got some dirt, pun intended, on his record. But did we find anything solid? Something we can pin to this house? Anna nodded and slid another file across the table, a land transfer agreement. Here's the kicker. Cole didn't just live in house number 18. From 1994 to 1996, he was officially listed as the property caretaker. He wasn't just passing through. He worked for the owners, the Langstons, who were living out of state at the time. Caretaker? Harris repeated, his tone dubious. You're saying someone trusted this guy to look after their house? Anna shrugged. Apparently, the Langstons inherited the house from their uncle and didn't want to sell it yet. They were basically paying Cole peanuts to maintain the property. Webb's brow furrowed. Did the Langstons have any idea what they'd signed up for? Did they ever check in? Did they even know what was going on in that basement? We don't know yet, Anna admitted. I called the Langstons earlier today, but they've retired to Florida, and I'm still waiting for them to call back. Still, this caretaker gig lines up with some weird activity around town. She turned back to the whiteboard and pointed to a string of notes connecting various years. We've identified at least 2 disappearances during his time as the caretaker. Raymond Gutierrez, a plumber working in town in 1995, and Sarah McConnell, the teenage girl who vanished in 1994. Both disappeared while he was officially living and working in the house. Webb folded his arms, his jaw tightening with every word. Let me guess, those were the years people started hearing screams and seeing him digging up the yard? Anna nodded. Exactly. He wasn't just lurking in the background, Sheriff. He was the background. People saw him right there in that damn house. They just didn't realize what kind of monster they were looking at. Deputy Harris leaned forward, rubbing his chin. Okay, but where the hell is he now? If we're gonna make anything stick, we need him in cuffs. Working on it, Anna said, flipping to another document, a copy of a driver's license issued in 2002. This was the last official record I could find for Cole. He renewed an ID in Denver, Colorado, then vanished again. No taxes filed, no property under his name, no digital footprint. If he's alive, he's off the grid. Christ, Webb muttered. This guy's a ghost. Anna glanced at her watch, then hesitated. Well, maybe not completely. I've got a contact at the Denver PD pulling up any arrests or vagrant complaints for the last 10 years where someone matching Harris Cole's description popped up. If he's been hiding out, we'll find him. Harris leaned back, clearly frustrated. So we're betting on a maybe. Great. It's not a maybe, Anna shot back. It's a when. Webb interrupted before the debate could escalate. His voice was firm, almost angry. It's not just forensics anymore, people. If Cole's still alive, we have an obligation to find him. We've got the clues, the motive, and God help us, more than enough bodies to go around. We're bringing him down, period. He turned to Anna. Keep hammering that contact in Denver, and start looking at transient shelters, soup kitchens, anywhere someone like him might blend in. On it, Anna responded immediately, already reaching for her phone. Webb turned to Harris. Get with forensics and check if any of those damn bones give us an exact timeline. Age, gender, anything. I want a tighter window. Sure thing, boss, Harris mumbled, though even his usual skepticism seemed slightly shaken. As the team dispersed, Webb stood before the whiteboard one last time. His eyes lingered on Cole's smirking photo, his mind racing with what-if scenarios. There might still be more bodies waiting to be found. And worse, Harris Cole might still be out there, somewhere, plotting his next horrific move. For the sake of the town, Webb thought bitterly, they needed to bring him down before he could cast another shadow. An unexpected clue, the anonymous call. The air inside the Maple Hollow Sheriff's Department was heavy with simmering frustration. It had been 2 long, grueling weeks of dead ends, late nights, and unanswered questions regarding Harris Cole. The investigators had pored over every shred of evidence, from the skeletal remains in house number 18 to the disjointed timelines of the missing persons cases. Still, the key piece of the puzzle seemed maddeningly out of reach. Where was Harris Cole now? Deputy Anna Carter sat at the corner of the department's conference room, nursing a mug of coffee gone lukewarm hours ago. She stared bleakly at the whiteboard filled with pinned photographs, timelines, and the ever-present shadowy face of Harris Cole's mugshot. Sheriff Frank Webb paced the room, his heavy boots echoing against the tiled floor, his face set in grim concentration. "We've got nothing," Webb muttered, mostly to himself. 2 weeks, Carter, 2 damn weeks, and Cole's still a ghost. Vanished, just like his victims. Anna sighed, setting the mug down with a soft clink. "We're doing everything we can, Sheriff. Denver PD hasn't come up with much either. If he's alive, he knows how to stay hidden. No accounts, no records, no friends." She gestured toward Cole's photo. "And let's be honest, that face doesn't exactly scream approachable." Webb grunted, scanning the board again before running a hand through his graying hair. His eyes lingered on a cluster of photographs, the faces of 9 missing people haunting him like ghosts. "Somebody knows something," he muttered, almost to himself. "Somebody out there saw this guy, talked to him, hell, maybe even trusted him. We just have to find the right person." "Or hope they come forward," Anna murmured, not sounding optimistic. As if on cue, the desk phone in the adjacent bullpen suddenly rang, its shrill tones startling the silence. Deputy Harris, leaning lazily in his chair nearby, glanced over and grabbed at the receiver. "Maple Hollow Sheriff's Department, Deputy Harris speaking," he drawled, his tone flat with exhaustion. But as the voice on the other end spoke, the tired expression fell from his face entirely, his brow furrowed, and he straightened in his seat. "Wait, what? Who is this?" Harris asked, his voice suddenly sharp like a blade. He scribbled something onto his notepad, his hand trembling slightly. "You're sure? You're absolutely sure?" The sudden change in his tone caught Webb's attention. The sheriff stepped toward Harris, his eyes narrowing. Yes, we're listening." Harris continued into the phone, his voice tight with urgency. "Just stay on the line, can you? Damn it!" He slammed the receiver back down, frustrated. They hung up. What did they say?" Webb demanded, his tone clipped. Harris held up both hands for a moment, signaling that he needed to gather his thoughts. "Anonymous caller," he said quickly. "Didn't give a name, didn't say where they were calling from, sounded nervous as hell." "What did they say about Cole?" Anna asked, already reaching for her notebook. Harris tapped his finger against his scribbled note, his voice steady despite the tension clearly knotting his shoulders. "Cole's alive, Sheriff, and they claim they know exactly where he is." A beat of silence hung in the air, heavy as stone. "Where?" Webb asked, his voice low, his gaze fixed hard on Harris. "Somewhere off Route 46, Harris said. "The caller said Cole's been hiding in an old storage shed about 30 miles out, near the edge of Silver Pine Forest. Said he's been there for months now, moving mostly at night." He glanced up uneasily, the words catching in his throat. "And they said he talks to himself, about the house, about what he left behind." Anna let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. And why would they know all this? Why come forward now? "No explanation," Harris replied. "They sounded nervous, almost like they didn't want to be on the phone too long, didn't stick around to answer questions." Webb crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Could be a crank call," he muttered. But even as he said it, there was a glimmer of something in his voice. Hope, maybe, or cautious curiosity. "Maybe," Anna said. "But it fits, doesn't it? If Cole's still alive, he'd be hiding somewhere off the radar. A storage shed in the middle of nowhere. Sounds like his style." Harris nodded slowly. "And the caller mentioned Silver Pine Forest specifically, Sheriff. That's not just anywhere. That's isolated, rugged. Nobody goes out there unless they're trying real hard not to be found." Webb narrowed his focus, fingers drumming against his arm as the gears in his mind turned. Every instinct told him this could very well be a dead end, a cruel prank played during an already torturous investigation, but the weight of the losses, The victims, the families, the town itself, compelled him to do what he always did. Pursue the lead, no matter the odds. "All right," he said finally, his voice carrying the resolve of someone tired of waiting for answers. "We don't risk sitting on this. Anna, I want a team mobilized now. Get 4 units ready to head out to Silver Pine. I want every shed, every cabin, and every filthy goddamn hovel along Route 46 searched." "You got it," Anna responded immediately, grabbing the radio from the table and stepping out into the hallway to relay the orders. "What if it's a trap?" Harris asked, his less optimistic instincts kicking in. "Could be someone trying to send us out on a wild goose chase. Or worse, could be Cole setting us up." Webb shot him a look that was half irritation, half agreement. "It could be, but if there's even a chance we can nail this bastard, we're taking it." Harris nodded grimly. "Fair point." Within 30 minutes the team was prepped, their SUVs revving as they headed out toward Silver Pine Forest. The town's quiet streets reflected the tense atmosphere left behind in the sheriff's department. Webb stood next to Anna outside the precinct, watching the last vehicle disappear into the horizon. "If Cole's there," Anna said, her voice low, "this could finally be it, Sheriff. We might have him." Webb's jaw tightened. "Let's hope that caller's right," he said, "because if we don't find him there, I don't know if we'll find him at all." Inside his gut, though, Webb couldn't shake a cold, gnawing feeling. It wasn't relief, not hope, just the unsettling certainty that whatever they found in that forest wouldn't leave them unscathed. The pursuit of Harris and his painful confessions. The convoy of police vehicles roared through the dark twists and turns of Route 46, their headlights cutting a narrow path through the dense forest that loomed on either side. Deputy Anna Carter gripped the wheel of the lead SUV, her eyes flicking between the dim, empty road ahead and the GPS coordinates they were aiming for, a storage shed hidden deep near the edge of Silver Pine Forest. In the passenger seat, Sheriff Frank Webb sat stiffly, the tension radiating off him in waves. He hadn't spoken much since they left the station, the gravity of the moment weighing heavily. They had chased shadows for weeks, but this time they might be claiming those shadows by their neck. "You think he'll run?" Anna asked flatly, breaking the silence. Webb didn't turn his head, his eyes trained on the tree line outside. "If it's him, yeah. And if he does, we make sure he doesn't get far." Anna tightened her grip on the wheel and pressed the gas harder. "What if it's just another dead end?" Webb finally glanced at her, his expression stone cold. "It's not." Ahead of them, the narrow road widened into a clearing and they slowed as the other units rolled up behind. Floodlights clicked on, illuminating a derelict storage shed half buried under years of moss and dirt. It looked ancient, forgotten, and yet something about it sent chills crawling up Anna's spine as she parked the SUV. "Harris," Webb said under his breath, his voice laced with quiet fury. He stepped out of the car, his boots crunching against the gravel as officers poured out behind him. "Let's move," he ordered firmly. The team fanned out, circling the perimeter of the shed with flashlights scanning the area. There was no sound but the rustle of the forest and the distant chirp of crickets, the kind of quiet that weighed too heavily, like even the trees were holding their breath. Anna joined Webb at the front door, her weapon drawn. "Locked," she said tightly after testing the handle. "What do you want to bet he's inside?" Webb nodded toward another unit moving behind the shed. "Check the back first. He likes digging. If there's anything buried out here, I want it found." As a pair of deputies disappeared around the shed's rear, one of the officers returned hurriedly. "Sheriff," he said in a hushed voice, pointing to the window. "There's movement. Someone's in there." Immediately Webb raised his hand, signaling for everyone to get into position. "Harris Cole!" he barked loud enough to echo through the clearing, but not enough to shatter the tension. "This is the Maple Hollow Sheriff's Department. Step out of the building with your hands in the air, now!" For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no movement, nothing but the oppressive weight of the forest around them. Then, faintly, a creak from inside the shed. "I said now!" Webb's voice was sharper, his finger hovering near his holster. Seconds ticked by. When the door finally swung open, it moved agonizingly slow, like it weighed 1,000 pounds. A gaunt figure stepped into the floodlights, his frame hunched and skeletal, his ragged clothes hanging off him like a scarecrow. Harris Cole's eyes glinted as they adjusted to the light, and for a moment Anna swore he looked amused. "Well, hell," Harris drawled, his voice rasping like dried paper. His lips tugged into what could only be described as a grim parody of a smile. "Took y'all long enough." "Hands up, Harris!" Webb growled, taking a step forward with his weapon trained squarely on him. "Get on the ground! Now!" Harris raised his hands slowly, deliberately, though his expression didn't falter. His eyes darted between the officers, lingering on Webb with something almost mocking. "What's the matter, Sheriff? Took one too many tips for you to figure me out?" "Down! Now!" Webb shouted again, and this time Harris complied, his knees hitting the dirt hard before his face followed. Within seconds, 2 deputies were on him, cuffing his frail wrists behind his back. Anna exhaled, barely aware she'd been holding her breath. Is that it? After all this time, he just gives up? Webb shook his head, watching as Harris sat up on his knees calmly, almost like he'd planned for this moment. Something tells me it's not going to be that simple. The ride back to the station was heavy with silence, punctuated only by Harris Cole's occasional maddening chuckle from the back seat. Webb, riding passenger in Anna's SUV, hadn't taken his eyes off Cole's reflection in the rearview mirror, studying every twitch and smirk. "You think this is funny?" Webb finally snapped, his voice a razor's edge. "Not funny," Harris rasped, his smile spreading like an oil slick. "Satisfying." Webb's eyes darkened, his knuckles white against the armrest. "Wait until you're locked up, you won't be grinning then." "Locked up? Sheriff!" Harris's tone was almost pitying. "I haven't been hiding, I've been waiting, don't you get it? You're all late to the show. The curtain dropped years ago." Anna's grip on the wheel tightened, resisting the urge to slam the brakes. "What the hell is he talking about?" "Don't bother asking questions," Webb muttered. "He's just setting the stage." Hours later, in the small, fluorescent-lit interrogation room, Harris sat across from Webb and Anna, his cuffed hands resting on the steel table. For the first time since his arrest, his smile was gone, though his eyes burned with an unnerving intensity. "You want answers, Sheriff?" Harris asked abruptly, leaning forward as far as his restraints would allow. "Fine. You found the bodies, didn't you?" Webb bristled. "We found a lot more than that." "Good," Harris said, his voice softening almost to a whisper, "because I remember every one of them, where I found them, what they—" He paused, his voice cracking slightly as he tilted his head. "Sounded like." Webb slammed his fist on the table, the sound reverberating through the room. "Enough games! Who were they? Why did you do it?" Harris blinked slowly, unfazed. "Why?" He laughed quietly, shaking his head in disbelief. "You think I know why? Sheriff, you ever been thirsty? I mean really thirsty? It's not about why you crave water, you just need it." "Need it," Anna repeated flatly, her stomach twisting. "Hurting them wasn't about hate," Harris continued almost dreamily. "It's not personal, it's just hunger. The way they'd beg, sob, scream, it fills that hollow spot inside, you know? Their fear makes you whole." Anna looked away, bile rising in her throat. Webb leaned in, his face inches from Harris's. "You're done hurting people. You're gonna rot in a cell for what you've done." But Harris only smiled again, his teeth yellowed and uneven. "That's the thing, Sheriff, I don't rot, they do." His words hung thick and heavy as Webb stormed out, leaving Anna alone in the room with the monster she couldn't seem to understand. Harris just sat there, staring straight ahead, humming a low, tuneless sound as if nothing in the world could touch him. And for the first time in her career, Anna felt truly out of her depth, not in tracking a killer, but in comprehending the dark void behind his eyes. Revealing the truth about the barbaric motive for killing. It was late in the evening when Sheriff Frank Webb and Deputy Anna Carter sat down in the sterile interrogation room across from Harris Cole. His wiry frame looked even smaller in the orange jumpsuit, his cuffs rattling faintly as he shifted in his seat. Despite his gaunt appearance, there was a chilling sense of control in his posture, a man who took pleasure in holding the room hostage with anticipation. A single fluorescent light buzzed softly above them, casting harsh shadows on the whitewashed walls. The quiet was suffocating, and it was Harris who finally broke it. "You've got questions. I can see it all over your faces," Harris began, his voice dry and rasping, but sharp with focus. "So go on, ask. Everyone wants to know why." Webb leaned forward, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on Harris like a hawk eyeing prey. "Let's start there then. Why? Why kill them? All of them. Those were people, Harris, men, women, even kids. What the hell justifies that?" Harris tilted his head, a thin smile creeping over his lips. "Justify?" he repeated, letting the word hang in the air like smoke. "You're looking for a reason. That's your problem, Sheriff. There ain't no justice in a storm, no sense to a fire, it just is. All this, it's nature, same as anything else." Anna's pen hovered above her notebook, her grip tightening as she fought to suppress the chill racing up her spine. "Nature? You're calling yourself some kind of force of nature? You murdered people, Harris. families, lives. Stop hiding behind metaphors and tell us what drove you to it." Harris's eyes flicked to her, and for a moment that smirk faded into something far colder. "You wouldn't understand, Deputy," he said softly, almost pityingly. "You're still trapped in the idea that people matter. Take away all the noise, all the day-to-day garbage, and you'll see how small they really are. Most of them walk around already broken, crying about their lives, thinking the world owes them something. They ain't even alive, they're just waiting to end." Webb slammed his fist on the table. "Enough of the bullshit, Harris. You're all talk, and we're not buying the existential garbage you're selling. You enjoyed this. Admit it." Harris flinched slightly but then let out a low, guttural laugh, a sound that scraped against the room's walls. "Enjoyment? Yeah, I guess that's what you'd call it," he said with a dark grin. "You ever see the way a deer freezes when it knows it's about to get hit? That wide-eyed, desperate panic, it's intoxicating. Everything about 'em is real in that moment. Hell, it's the only time they're real." He leaned forward, meeting Webb's scowl with his unsettling calm. "I gave 'em their moment of truth, no lies, no distractions, just fear, pure and raw, and you know what? None of 'em were ready for it." "Jesus Christ," Anna muttered under her breath, her stomach twisting into knots. Webb's voice turned sharp, almost trembling with controlled anger. "You're not a predator. You're not some righteous force of nature. You're a damn psychopath who gets off on suffering." Harris grinned wider, his yellowed teeth glinting in the fluorescent light. "If that's what makes you comfortable, Sheriff, sure. Call me whatever helps you sleep. But tell me something. Do you think yelling at me changes anything? I already did it. They already screamed. The dirt already swallowed them up." "Why them?" Anna suddenly cut in, her voice shaking but determined. "Why those people? You're trying to make it sound random, like nature doesn't discriminate, but you had to choose them. You had to pick." For the first time, Harris hesitated. His jaw shifted slightly, and for a sliver of a second there was something fragile behind his cold arrogance before he spoke again. "It wasn't about who they were," he said finally. "It was about what they weren't." Anna squinted, leaning in closer. "What they weren't? What the hell does that mean?" "They weren't worth a damn," Harris said bluntly, his voice tightening. "Drifters, nobodies, the broken ones, people who nobody cared about. You think anyone was going to come looking for some junkie plumber or some runaway who left home? Hell, even that teenage girl. She walked home alone every damn night. If she mattered to anyone, they would have been there. None of them mattered. Not to the world, not to anyone." Webb's knuckles turned white as his hands gripped the edge of the table. "They mattered to someone, Harris. Every single one of them had a life. They had value, no matter what your twisted logic says." "Value?" Harris said, cocking his head like the idea was laughable. "There's no value in a world this crowded, Sheriff. People throw away lives like garbage every day. Wars, drugs, greed. Difference is, I made something out of it. I took 'em and turned 'em into memories. Only thing that's real." Anna shook her head, disbelief etched across her face. "You convinced yourself that killing them gave their lives meaning? That's what this is to you?" Harris's eyes burned into hers, unblinking. "I didn't just kill 'em. I collected 'em. Each one of 'em was—" He paused, searching for the word, his bony fingers flexing against the cuffs. "A piece of me. Little fragments, filling that empty space inside. You don't know what it's like, Deputy, walking around with a hole in your chest so big it swallows everything. But in their fear, their screams, their pain, I could feel it start to close." Anna finally looked away, bile rising in her throat. Webb stared Harris down, his own anger barely contained beneath the surface. "This whole damn thing, it's just been about feeding your emptiness? You killed people because you didn't know how to feel alive?" "Sheriff," Harris murmured, his smile creeping back into place. "It worked, didn't it?" A deafening stillness filled the room after his words. Webb pushed his chair back abruptly and stood, his fists trembling at his sides. "Enjoy your hole, Harris. I promise where you're going, you won't be filling it anytime soon." As Webb stormed toward the door, Anna remained seated, her eyes glued to Harris. He watched her with quiet fascination, as if tickled by her disbelief. "You'll think about it," Harris said, his voice low and almost tender. "You'll lie awake at night, wondering if maybe I wasn't wrong. Maybe the whole world is just noise and the best parts are found in silence." Anna stood suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You're not silence, Harris," she said sternly, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "You're the kind of noise people fight to drown out." But as she turned to leave, Harris called after her, his voice carrying a laughter that didn't reach his expression. "Don't kid yourself, Deputy. You hear me now. Louder than anything. The door slammed shut behind her, sealing him inside, but Harris's laugh lingered, echoing softly as Anna leaned her back against the hallway wall, closing her eyes and steadying her breath. For all her anger, for all her years on the job, Anna had never felt closer to the edge, because for one fleeting second, she could almost hear his point. A tragic ending. Harris receives the death penalty. The courtroom was packed, every creak of a chair, every whispered exchange hung heavy in the air, weighed down by the grim proceedings about to unfold. Maple Hollow's quiet courthouse had never seen such a crowd. Residents from every corner of town came to witness judgment passed on the man who had haunted their nightmares. A man who had turned their peaceful town into a crime scene spanning decades. Harris Cole, shackled and stone-faced, sat at the defense table. His orange jumpsuit looked washed out under the cold, fluorescent lighting, but it was his eyes that drew the most attention. They were empty, maybe from detachment, maybe defiance. It was the same emotionless stare he had worn from his arrest through every grueling day of his trial. Sheriff Frank Webb sat in the second-to-last row, his hands folded tightly in his lap. Beside him was Deputy Anna Carter, notebookless for the first time in months. She wasn't here to investigate or dissect. Neither of them was. Today was about acknowledging the end of a nightmare, a messy, bitter end, but an end nonetheless. Anna leaned toward Webb, breaking the weighty silence between them. "How do you think he'll take it?" she asked quietly, glancing toward Harris at the front of the room. Webb's jaw tightened, his voice low and deliberate. "Men like him don't break. They don't plead. They sit there and wear whatever the world gives them and dare you to feel something about it." Anna frowned, but didn't respond. She could still hear Harris's mocking voice from the interrogation room weeks ago, that eerie mixture of arrogance and calm as he talked about his victims. She wished she could believe this verdict would bring her peace, but every time his cold, lifeless eyes caught hers, all she felt was a pit of unease. "All rise!" the bailiff announced, his sharp voice cutting through the thick air. The room stood as Judge Catherine Rowe entered, her black robe flowing as she took her seat at the bench. Short and stern, Rowe wasted little time as she shuffled papers and addressed the courtroom. "Mr. Harris Cole," she began, her voice measured but firm, "you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers on 6 counts of first-degree murder, 4 counts of unlawful concealment of remains, and additional related charges, all carrying the harshest possible penalties under the law." From the back row, a sharp inhale could be heard, a family member of one of the victims, no doubt. Others exchanged tense glances, their expressions darkened by years of unanswered questions, all laying at Harris's feet. Rowe glanced down at Harris, who sat utterly motionless, and paused for a moment as if giving him one last chance to react. But he didn't blink. He barely even breathed. "As such," Rowe continued, her voice hardening, "this court sentences you to death by lethal injection. The punishment will be carried out at the discretion of the state within the parameters of applicable law." The words sank into the room like stones dropped into still water. A murmur broke out among the crowd, the victims' families, the curious onlookers, even the reporters who had come from neighboring towns to capture the most infamous trial in Maple Hollow's history. Anna felt her chest tighten. Despite everything, despite knowing he deserved this, she couldn't shake the discomfort gnawing at her. Justice had been served, they all said, but why didn't it feel like the kind of justice anyone could celebrate? Harris finally moved, though not to speak. His shoulders shifted ever so slightly as he leaned back in his chair, that same dead, cryptic expression still etched across his face. Even with the weight of multiple death sentences on him, he seemed almost content. Webb whispered more to himself than to Anna, "He doesn't care, not one damn bit." Anna turned toward him, her voice carrying a hint of bitterness. "Why would he? He probably thinks all of this is part of the spectacle he wanted. The trial, the stares, the outrage. It's everything a man like him eats up." "Harris Cole!" Judge Rowe's voice rang out again, calling everyone's attention back to the present. She adjusted her glasses and looked straight at him. "Do you have anything to say before sentencing is finalized?" The civilians in the crowd shifted forward in their seats, leaning in to hear the words of the man they had come to see as a monster. Even Webb and Anna, despite their years of experience, found themselves holding their breath for what Cole might say. Harris let the silence stretch as he turned his head toward the judge. Then, slowly, a smile cracked his gaunt face. It wasn't a wide grin. It was small, faint, just enough to make the bile rise in Anna's throat again. "Your Honor," he said, his voice soft yet steady, "I've already said all I needed to." Judge Rowe didn't flinch. "Very well," she replied curtly before her gavel slammed against the wood with a resounding thud. Court is adjourned. The room exploded with noise, whispers, sobs, the rustle of chairs being pushed back as people began filing out. Several family members of victims tried their best to walk straight, their pained faces barely holding together the weight of their grief. Webb and Anna stayed seated for a moment, watching as Harris was escorted out by 2 guards. He walked with no resistance, his expression unchanged, his hands bound tightly in front of him. He didn't look back, not at the families, not at the room, and not at the 2 people who had doggedly tracked him down. "He won't make any appeals," Webb said, breaking the silence. "He won't fight this." Anna nodded reluctantly. "Because he doesn't care." Webb shifted in his seat, his voice low. "I don't think it's that. I think he's satisfied. To a man like him, this sentence is just another ending he thinks he's in control of." Anna rubbed her temples, exhaustion seeping into every word. "And what about us? Do we just hope this verdict is enough for them?" She gestured toward the families still lingering in the room, some huddled quietly against each other, some staring blankly at nothing. Webb sat back, his jaw working visibly as he stared at the empty front of the courtroom. "No sentence, no matter how harsh, will bring them peace. Truth is, it's never enough. Not when you've got this much hurt." The silence lingered between them for a long moment. People filed out of the courtroom, reporters snapping their last photos, looking for families too shell-shocked to refuse interviews. Anna finally stood and reached for her jacket. "I guess that's it then," she said, more to herself than to Webb. But Webb didn't move. His gaze was locked on the empty space where Harris had been only minutes before. After a long pause, he shook his head slowly. "No," he muttered. "It ain't over. For the families, for this town, for anyone who ever stepped foot in that house, it'll never really be over." A heartbreaking lesson for the community. The town hall was packed to the brim, every seat taken, residents cramming into the aisles and lining the walls. For once, the atmosphere in Maple Hollow wasn't the carefree, sleepy kind that had marked the community for decades. Instead, it was heavy, somber. People whispered to each other in murmurs, glancing toward the makeshift stage at the front of the room where Sheriff Frank Webb and Deputy Anna Carter stood waiting. This was meant to be a moment of reflection, a coming together after months of unrelenting trauma. The capture of Harris Cole and his subsequent sentencing should have been the closure the town needed, but closure didn't come that easily. Webb took the microphone first. His uniform, usually pristine, seemed weighed down with the weight of what he had seen, of the lives that had been shattered under his watch. He scanned the crowd, taking a moment before he spoke. "I won't pretend that anything I say tonight will make this hurt any less," Webb began. His voice was steady, but the undertone of weariness couldn't be missed. "What we've experienced, what this town has gone through, it's not something we can just sweep under the rug and move on from. It's gonna leave something behind in all of us." In the third row, a woman, her eyes rimmed red from crying, clutched a framed photo of her sister. The photo was one of the only remains of a victim whose body had been dug up from under house number 18. She stared at Webb with an expression that demanded an explanation, even though no one could give her the one she wanted. "I've lived in this town my whole life," Webb continued. "Saw it grow, saw it change, but I also watched as we let things slide, as we turned away from the things that didn't feel like our problem. That house, Harris Cole, the pain he left behind, it's a tragedy, and it's a tragedy that should have been stopped a long damn time ago." A figure rose from the back of the room, his voice cutting through the silence. "Are you saying this is our fault?" The man, older, his weathered features angry and defensive, looked directly at Webb. "How are we supposed to know? We're not the law." Webb exhaled deeply, pinching the bridge of his nose before responding. "I'm not blaming anyone, but let's not pretend there weren't signs, Bill. Let's not act like people didn't hear screams from that house, didn't see Harris out in his yard digging at midnight, didn't notice how house number 18 kept changing hands over the years while people disappeared." Some murmurs rippled through the crowd at Webb's pointed tone. Anna stepped closer to him, her careful eyes scanning the room. "What Sheriff Webb is saying," she interjected, her voice softer but no less firm, "is that this isn't about guilt. It's about responsibility. Harris Cole was one man, yes, but it was the silence, the it's not my business attitude, the way we ignored the warning signs, that allowed him to spread his darkness for so long." Her words hung in the air as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "I remember," Anna said, taking a breath, "standing out front of house number 18 when the excavators uncovered the first set of remains, and I kept asking myself, how many people had walked past this house, looked at its peeling paint and broken windows and told themselves, that place gives me the creeps, but never thought to speak up? And I don't mean just the house. She paused, surveying the room. How many of us say the same thing whenever we see something that doesn't feel quite right? A neighbor who keeps to himself, someone who doesn't act the way we think they should, a cry for help that we convince ourselves is none of our business. I've seen it, she added, her voice growing heavier, in Harris Cole's victims. In the people who were forgotten because someone decided they weren't worth saving, and that, her voice cracked slightly but she recovered before continuing. That has to change. A young man near the aisle stood hesitantly, his hand gripping the wooden back of the chair in front of him. But what are we supposed to do, huh? He asked, his voice faint but trembling. How do we know the difference between someone who's just weird and someone who's dangerous? Webb stepped forward again, taking the question head on. You don't, he said bluntly. Not for certain. But here's what you can do. Stop turning away. Stop brushing off what unsettles you. We don't need a community of vigilantes, but we need a community that gives a damn, that trusts their instincts enough to say, hey, something's not right here, and actually reports it. That should have happened a long time ago, and maybe, just maybe, that would have saved some folks we lost. Another voice piped up, this time from a woman holding the hand of a child who couldn't be much older than 10. But how do we move on from something like this? Knowing what happened in our town, in our backyard? Anna met the woman's eyes, her expression softening slightly. We move forward together, she said gently. That's the only way. We have to talk about what happened. We have to honor the lives we lost, not by pretending this will ever feel okay, but by making sure those lives weren't forgotten, by making sure this never, ever happens again. The crowd murmured again, some nodding their heads in agreement while others simply sat quietly with furrowed brows and downcast eyes. Margie Sims, one of Maple Hollow's oldest residents, stood slowly from her seat near the front of the room. Her cane trembled slightly in her hand. I lived right up the street from House 18, she said, her voice rough with age but clear, and I'll admit it. There were times I looked the other way. We're a small town, Sheriff. We stick to our own. And for a long time, I thought that was a good thing. She looked down at her shaking hands. But that man showed me how wrong I was. From now on, I'll keep my door open. I'll pay attention to my neighbors. Nobody should slip away in silence. Webb's eyes softened as he nodded toward Margie. That's what we need, Margie. All of us. Together. Taking a final look at the crowd, Webb adjusted the microphone stand one last time, his jaw working visibly before he spoke. Maple Hollow used to be the type of town where the worst thing folks worried about was who'd won the pie contest at the county fair. That kind of innocence, we may not get that back, but we can damn sure try to build a community where everyone matters, where no one goes unheard. He paused, scanning the room to make sure people were hearing him. Harris Cole left scars on all of us in one way or another. This town can't keep pretending it's untouched. We have a choice to make. We can become a town that learns, or a town that forgets, and I think you all know which one we need to be. The room fell silent, but it wasn't the quiet of apprehension, it was heavy with reflection. Slowly, the crowd began to applaud, a few hesitant claps growing into a steady rhythm. Not out of celebration, but out of commitment. As the people began to file out of the town hall, quietly murmuring among themselves, Anna turned back to Webb. You think we got through to them? Webb watched the crowd with a hint of hope glimmering behind his tired eyes. I think they've got a lot to think about, and that's a start. Anna nodded, letting the quiet settle for a moment. It's something, she said softly. And together, they walked toward the doors, leaving the harsh fluorescent lights of the town hall behind.